The amber glow of sunset filtered through half-drawn curtains, casting long shadows across Sarah Mitchell's living room floor. The familiar crunch of gravel under tires made her stomach clench. Michael was home early. Too early. Her fingers trembled as she quickly closed the browser window where she'd been researching women's shelters, the laptop screen going dark just as the front door slammed. "Where's my dinner?" Michael's words slurred together, the sharp smell of whiskey preceding him into the room. Sarah's 6-year-old son Tommy pressed closer to her side, his small hands gripping her sweater. The evening air grew thick with tension, the wall clock's steady ticking marking each moment like a countdown. "It's warming in the oven," Sarah replied, keeping her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "I can get it for you, Dash." The sound of breaking glass cut through her words as Michael knocked over a photo frame, sending it crashing to the hardwood floor. Sarah flinched at the sight of their wedding photo among the shattered pieces, a reminder of different times, when Michael's eyes had held warmth instead of rage, when his hands had offered gentle touches instead of threats. "Useless," Michael spat, swaying slightly as he advanced. "Can't even have dinner ready on time. What do you do all day besides waste my money?" His words carried the bitter edge she'd grown to recognize, the precursor to violence that had become all too familiar over the past 3 years. Sarah's mind drifted to their early days, when Michael had been the charming investment banker who'd swept her off her feet with surprise flowers and thoughtful gestures. He'd seemed like a dream come true, successful, attentive, promising her the world. The transition had been subtle at first. A few angry outbursts blamed on work stress, some controlling behaviors disguised as concern. Then came the gambling, the drinking, the slow drain of their savings that left them living paycheck to paycheck in what had once been their dream home. The walls that had once felt like a sanctuary now seemed to close in around her, trapping her in a maze of fear and manipulation. Every room held memories of violence. The kitchen where he'd first struck her, the hallway where she crumpled against the wall after a particularly brutal night, the bedroom door she'd reinforced with a hidden lock to give Tommy some protection during Michael's worst episodes. Tommy's small body trembled against her side as Michael stumbled closer, his alcohol-fueled rage filling the room like a toxic cloud. Sarah's maternal instincts surged, overwhelming the paralysis of fear that had kept her trapped for so long. Her son's safety had always been her priority, but watching him shrink away from his father's approach ignited something fierce within her. The dining room table between them offered little protection as Michael's hand shot out, grabbing for her arm. Sarah managed to step back, pulling Tommy with her. The movement sent a stack of unpaid bills scattering across the floor, most of them for Michael's gambling debts, each one a paper chain binding her to this nightmare. "You think you're better than me?" Michael's voice rose to a roar. "After everything I've done for you?" His fist connected with the wall, leaving another dent in the growing collection of rage-marked surfaces. The impact seemed to ripple through the house, shaking loose more memories of better times. Family dinners filled with laughter, weekend movie nights cuddled on the couch, Tommy's first steps across this very floor. The contrast between those memories and their current reality struck Sarah like a physical blow. She'd been holding onto those glimpses of the man she'd married, using them as justification to stay, to hope for change. But as she watched Michael kick aside Tommy's forgotten toy truck, sending it skidding across the floor, she realized how thoroughly that man had disappeared. Their home, once fee, with warmth and possibility, had become a battlefield where she fought daily to protect herself and Tommy from Michael's unpredictable moods. The carefully arranged family photos on the walls now seemed like museum pieces, preserving moments that would never return. Each room held its own inventory of broken promises. The study where Michael had once helped Tommy with his drawings, now permanently locked to hide evidence of gambling addiction. The kitchen where they'd cooked together, now a place she rushed through tasks to avoid confrontation. Sarah's hand found Tommy's shoulder, feeling his rapid heartbeat through his thin t-shirt. The sound of Michael's continued ranting faded into background noise as clarity washed over her. This wasn't just about her anymore. It never had been. Every moment they stayed was another lesson teaching Tommy that this was what love looked like, that this was what he should expect from relationships, from family. The weight of this realization pressed against her chest as Michael stormed into the kitchen, the sounds of cabinets slamming punctuating his continued tirade. Sarah used the moment to guide Tommy toward the stairs, her mind racing through possibilities. She'd been squirreling away small amounts of cash for months, hiding it in an old teddy bear in Tommy's room. It wasn't much, but it might be enough for a start. The sharp crash of breaking dishes from the kitchen made Tommy jump, a small whimper escaping his lips. Sarah knelt down, pulling him close, breathing in the familiar scent of his shampoo. "It's okay, baby," she whispered, though they both knew it wasn't. "Remember our quiet game? Let's play that now." Tommy nodded, his big brown eyes wide with understanding beyond his years. He'd learned too early how to move silently, how to read the signs of approaching danger, how to make himself small and unnoticed. Each of these learned survival skills was another failure on Sarah's part, another reason why tomorrow couldn't be like today. As Michael's thundering voice rose again, Sarah made a decision that would alter the course of their lives forever. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with obstacles she couldn't yet see, but staying meant watching Tommy grow up in fear, learning that love and violence were inseparable companions. She couldn't let that be his inheritance. The evening light continued to fade, casting longer shadows across their living room battlefield. But for the first time in years, Sarah felt something else growing alongside her fear: determination. As Michael's rage echoed through their house, she held Tommy closer, her mind already mapping out their escape. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow, they would break free. She didn't know then how their story would unfold, couldn't have predicted the unexpected allies they would find or the surprising form their salvation would take. All she knew was that somewhere beyond these walls, beyond Michael's reach, there had to be a chance for a different life. And for Tommy's sake, she would find it. Every previous attempt to leave had been thwarted by fear, by lack of resources, by Michael's threats and manipulations. But watching Tommy's small shoulders shake with each crash from the kitchen, Sarah felt steel enter her spine. This time would be different. This time, she would succeed, not just for herself, but for the little boy who deserved a childhood free from fear. The sun's last rays painted the room in shades of gold and shadow, a fitting backdrop for the moment when Sarah Mitchell finally decided to stop surviving and start fighting for their future. The path ahead was uncertain, but anything was better than watching her son learn that love meant living in fear. The familiar sounds of Michael's rage continued in the background, but for once, Sarah wasn't listening. Her mind was already elsewhere, planning their escape, imagining a future where Tommy could laugh without checking over his shoulder furs. Whatever came next, whatever challenges they faced, it had to be better than this slow death of spirit they were enduring. As darkness settled over their prison-like home, Sarah held her son close and began to plan. She didn't know then that their salvation would come in an unexpected form, or that the small acts of kindness she'd shown to others would return to protect them in their hour of need. All she knew was that tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow, they would be free. The night stretched ahead, full of possibility and danger. Sarah's heart raced with fear, but also with hope, a dangerous, necessary emotion she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. As Michael's drunken rage eventually subsided into unconsciousness, she began to move, quietly but purposefully, setting in motion events that would change their lives forever. Sarah waited until Michael's snores echoed from the living room couch before she began to move. The familiar sound was both a relief and a trigger for anxiety. Relief that his rage had subsided, anxiety because she knew their window of opportunity was limited. With practiced silence, she guided Tommy up the stairs, each step carefully placed to avoid the creaking boards they'd both memorized over years of midnight escapes to his room. The darkness felt different tonight, charged with purpose rather than just fear. Sarah's mind raced through mental checklists as she pulled their emergency bag from its hiding place deep in Tommy's closet. She'd been adding to it gradually over months. A change of clothes for each of them, Tommy's favorite stuffed elephant, their important documents carefully hidden in a false bottom she'd created from an old cereal box. "Mommy!" Tommy's whisper was barely audible, but it carried worlds of understanding. "Are we leaving for real this time?" The question caught in Sarah's chest like a physical pain. How many times had she promised they would leave, only to lose her nerve when morning came? How many times had she taught him that promises could be broken, just like his father did? But this time was different. This time, she could feel it in her bones. "Yes, baby," she whispered back, pulling him close. "This time we're really going. But we have to be very quiet, like ninjas, remember?" Tommy nodded solemnly, his small face serious in the dim light filtering through his window. He'd always loved playing ninja, turning their necessary silence into a game. It was one of many ways he'd adapted to their life of walking on eggshells, and each adaptation was another reason they had to leave. Sarah moved efficiently through the darkness, gathering only what they couldn't leave behind. The cash she'd hidden away, just over $600, saved in small increments from grocery money and the part-time job she'd managed to keep secret from Michael. Tommy's favorite books, the ones he couldn't sleep without. The locket containing pictures of her parents, long gone but still watching over her. Each item was carefully wrapped in soft clothing to prevent any noise. The household sounds were familiar yet strange tonight. The hum of the refrigerator, the distant drip of the bathroom faucet that Michael had never fixed, his snores from downstairs. But now they seemed like the ticking of a countdown clock, marking the precious minutes they had to make their escape. As Sarah zipped up their bag, her hand brushed against something soft at the bottom of Tommy's closet. His baby blanket, the one she'd made while pregnant, full of hopes and dreams for their future. She hesitated only a moment before adding it to their supplies. They would need all the comfort they could get in the days ahead. The stairs proved to be the biggest challenge. Each step had to be carefully navigated, their weight distributed, just so to avoid any telltale creaks. Tommy followed her lead perfectly, his small feet landing exactly where hers had been, like a well-rehearsed dance. Sarah's heart undid so loudly she was sure it would wake Michael, but his snores continued uninterrupted. The front door was too risky. It squeaked, and the security chain made too much noise. Instead, Sarah led them through the kitchen to the back door, the one she'd been carefully oiling over the past week in preparation for this moment. The cool night air hit them like a blessing as they slipped out into the darkness, carrying with them only what they could fit in one bag and the hope of a better future. Sarah's ancient Honda was parked around the corner, positioned there earlier that day in a rare moment of foresight. The walk felt endless, every shadow potentially hiding someone who might alert Michael, every distant dog bark making them freeze in their tracks. But finally, they reached the car, and Sarah's trembling hands managed to unlock it without dropping the keys. As she buckled Tommy into his booster seat, Sarah caught a glimpse of movement in the darkness. Her heart nearly stopped until she realized it was just a stray cat, one of the many she'd been feeding behind the diner where she secretly worked. The cat's eyes gleamed in the darkness, seeming to wish them well as they prepared to leave everything behind. "Ready?" she whispered to Tommy, meeting his eyes in the rearview mirror. He nodded, clutching his stuffed elephant close. Sarah took a deep breath and started the car, her whole body tense as she waited to see if the sound would carry to the house. But no lights came on, no angry shouts broke the night's silence. As they pulled away from the curb, Sarah felt something crack inside her chest. Not breaking, but rather opening, like a door long locked finally swinging free. They had no real destination in mind, no solid plan beyond getting away, but for the first time in years, she felt like she could breathe. The streetlights slid past like stars falling, each one taking them further from their prison and closer to whatever future awaited them. Tommy's reflection in the mirror showed him watching the familiar houses of their neighborhood disappear, his face solemn but unafraid. He'd always been braver than she was. Sarah drove through the sleeping town, past the park where she'd first met Michael, past the church where they'd married, past all the landmarks of a life that had slowly transformed from a dream into a nightmare. Each mile marker on the highway that followed was another small victory, another step toward freedom. They drove through the night, stopping only once for gas at a station, far enough away that Sarah felt safe using her debit card one last time. She knew Michael would be able to trace the transaction, but by then they would be long gone. Tommy slept in the back seat, his face peaceful for the first time in what felt like years. As dawn began to paint the sky in shades of hope, Sarah allowed herself to think about the future. She had no illusions about the difficulties ahead. They had limited money, no real plan, and Michael would certainly come looking for them. But they were free, and for now, that was enough. What Sarah couldn't know, as she drove toward the rising sun, was that their journey was just beginning. She couldn't have predicted the series of events that would unfold, or the unexpected guardians who would come to their aid in their darkest hour. All she knew was that they were finally on their way to something better, leaving behind the shadows of their past for the promise of a new day. The road stretched ahead of them, empty in the early morning light, full of both possibility and danger. Sarah's hands were steady on the wheel now, her fear transforming into determination with each mile that separated them from Michael. Whatever came next, they would face it together, free from the shadow of violence that had darkened their lives for too long. As the sun rose fully above the horizon, Sarah caught Tommy's eye in the rearview mirror and managed a small smile. He smiled back, tired but trusting, and in that moment, Sarah knew with absolute certainty that they had made the right choice. The road ahead was uncertain, but anything was better than the certainty of the life they'd left behind. Little did they know that their journey would lead them to unexpected allies, and that the small acts of kindness Sarah had shown to others would return to protect them when they needed it most. But for now, they drove on, mother and son, toward whatever future awaited them, leaving the shadows of their past behind with each passing mile. The sun had climbed high in the sky by the time Sarah pulled into the parking lot of a small roadside motel. The neon vacancy sign buzzed faintly, a few letters dark, but the building looked clean enough. More importantly, it was cash only, with no cameras that she could see. The kind of place that didn't ask too many questions. Tommy stirred in the back seat as she parked, his eyes blinking against the bright morning light. "Are we safe now?" he asked, his voice small but steady. Sarah's heart clenched at the question. "We're getting there, baby," she answered, trying to infuse her voice with more confidence than she felt. "How about we get some breakfast?" The motel office smelled of coffee and pine-scented cleaner. The elderly woman behind the desk barely looked up from her crossword puzzle as Sarah paid for 3 nights in advance, using some of their precious cash. No credit cards, no ID required. Exactly what they needed. Their room was basic but clean, with 2 beds covered in faded floral spreads and a small kitchenette. Tommy immediately claimed the bed by the window, arranging his stuffed elephant carefully on the pillow. The normality of the gesture made Sarah's throat tight. He was still just a little boy, despite everything they'd been through. "How about pancakes?" Sarah suggested, desperate to maintain some sense of normalcy. There was a diner across the parking lot, its windows advertising an all-day breakfast special. Tommy's face lit up at the suggestion, and for a moment, he looked like any other excited 6-year-old. The diner was nearly empty when they entered, just a few truckers nursing coffee at the counter. Sarah chose a booth near the back, positioning herself to watch both the entrance and the parking lot. Old habits died hard. Tommy climbed into the opposite seat, already reaching for the colorful kids' menu. A waitress approached their table, her name tag reading Gloria. She had kind eyes and laugh lines around her mouth, reminding Sarah of her own mother. "What can I get for you, too?" "Chocolate chip pancakes," Tommy exclaimed, then quickly glanced at Sarah, unsure if he'd been too loud. "Chocolate chip pancakes it is," Gloria smiled, writing it down. "And for Mom?" Sarah ordered coffee and toast. Her stomach too nodded to handle much else. As Gloria walked away, Sarah noticed her looking back at them, a flicker of understanding crossing her weathered face. Sarah tensed, wondering if they should leave, but something in Gloria's expression spoke of compassion rather than judgment. Their food arrived quickly, accompanied by an extra side of bacon that wasn't on their order. "On the house," Gloria winked at Tommy. "Growing boys need their protein." As Tommy dug into his pancakes, Sarah's phone buzzed in her pocket. Her heart stopped. Michael had discovered their absence. The screen showed 15 missed calls and a stream of texts ranging from apologetic to threatening. She turned the phone off, knowing they needed to get rid of it soon. It could be tracked. "Miss?" Gloria's voice startled her. The waitress had returned, setting down a piece of paper along with their check. "There's a women's shelter 2 towns over. They don't advertise much, for obvious reasons, but they're good people. My sister, well, let's just say they helped her when she needed it." Sarah's eyes burned with unexpected tears. "Thank you," she whispered, "Chew." quickly wiping them away before Tommy could notice. Gloria nodded, understanding in her eyes. The back door's through the kitchen, just in case you need it. She glanced meaningfully through the window, where a police car had just pulled into the parking lot. Sarah's heart raced as she recognized the officer stepping out, Dave Wilson, one of Michael's drinking buddies. He'd undoubtedly started calling in favors, using his connections to track them down. The morning sun suddenly felt too bright, too exposing. "Tommy, honey," Sarah kept her voice steady. "Want to see how a restaurant kitchen works?" Gloria led them through the chaos of the kitchen, past puzzled but discreet staff members, and out into the back alley. "My car's around the corner," she offered. "Blue Honda. Take it. I'll report it stolen tomorrow afternoon. Should give you some time." "I can't dash," Sarah began, but Gloria cut her off. "You can and you will. I couldn't help my sister in time. Let me help you." The sound of the police radio crackled from the front of the diner. In that moment, Sarah made her choice. She took the keys Gloria pressed into her hand, along with a hastily scribbled address. "There's a full tank of gas," Gloria said. Just make it count, okay?" They slipped out the back as Officer Wilson's voice carried from the front of the diner. Sarah helped Tommy into the unfamiliar car, her hands shaking but determined. As they pulled away, she caught a glimpse of Gloria in the rearview mirror, standing in the alley like a guardian angel in a faded waitress uniform. The address led them to a small town 3 hours north, where the autumn leaves were just beginning to turn. The women's shelter was housed in an old Victorian home, its paint peeling but its windows warm with light. A sign by the door read, "Second Chances Transitional Housing." As Sarah parked Gloria's car in the sheltered backlot, she felt something shift inside her, like a key turning in a lock she hadn't known existed. They weren't just running away anymore. They were running toward something. Hope, healing, a future where Tommy could grow up without flinching at sudden movements. The front door opened before they reached it, revealing a woman with silver hair and eyes that had seen too much but hadn't lost their warmth. "You must be Gloria's friends," she said simply. "I'm Margaret. Come in, dinner's almost ready." Tommy's small hand found Sarah's as they crossed the threshold. Behind them, the sun was setting on their first day of freedom, painting the sky in colors of promise. The road ahead would not be easy, but they had taken the first step. Sometimes, Sarah would learn, salvation comes not in grand gestures but in small kindnesses. A waitress's borrowed car, a stranger's offered shelter, and the courage to accept help when it appears. Inside Second Chances, Sarah discovered a world she hadn't known existed. A network of survivors helping survivors. Margaret, they learned, had been running the shelter for over 2 decades, transforming what started as a single safe house into a comprehensive support system. The Victorian house was more than just a shelter. It was a chrysalis where women and children could undergo their own metamorphosis. The first night, Tommy slept soundly for the first time in months, curled up in a bed adorned with superhero sheets donated by a local charity. Sarah lay awake in the adjacent twin bed, listening to the unfamiliar creaks of the old house and the soft breathing of other families behind neighboring doors. Each sound represented another story, another escape, another chance at renewal. Days at Second Chances followed a gentle but structured routine. Mornings began with communal breakfast in the large kitchen, where women from different backgrounds shared coffee and quiet understanding. Children played together in the secured backyard, their laughter a healing balm to the wounds their mothers carried. Sarah watched Tommy Mac, friends with other kids who understood without words what it meant to play quietly, to watch exits, to read moods in the air. Margaret's network proved invaluable. Within a week, Sarah had appointments with a pro bono lawyer who specialized in domestic violence cases, a job counselor who helped survivors rebuild their careers, and a trauma-informed therapist who worked with both her and Tommy. Each professional was carefully vetted, their offices located in secure buildings with protocols designed to protect their vulnerable clients. The shelter's computer room became Sarah's command center as she rebuilt their life piece by piece. She learned about digital security, erasing their digital footprints while creating new, protected ones. Other residents shared their knowledge freely, which banks were best for confidential accounts, which school districts had experience with children from domestic violence situations, which employers understood the need for flexible schedules and secure workplaces. Tommy flourished in the shelter's children's program, run by a child psychologist who used art and play therapy to help young survivors process their experiences. His drawings gradually evolved from dark scribbles to colorful scenes of their new life. The nightmare episodes that had plagued him began to decrease, replaced by peaceful sleep and morning smiles. As weeks passed, Sarah found herself changing too. The constant tension in her shoulders began to ease. She learned to trust her instincts again, to recognize the strength that had always lived within her. In group therapy sessions, she shared her story and heard echoes of it in others' experiences. The shame that had kept her isolated for so long dissolved in the warmth of shared understanding. 1 month into their stay, Margaret called Sarah into her office. "We've received word through our network," she said gently. "Michael's been making inquiries in nearby towns. He's working with some of his police contacts, but we're monitoring the situation." She smiled reassuringly at Sarah's panicked expression. "We've been doing this a long time, dear. Our security protocols exist for a reason." The shelter's security was indeed impressive. Cameras monitored every approach, windows were reinforced, and panic buttons were installed throughout the building. Staff members were trained in emergency protocols, and every resident knew the evacuation routes by heart. It wasn't just a house. It was a fortress of hope. Sarah's job search yielded promising results through Margaret's connections. A local publishing house needed a proofreader. Work that could initially be done remotely, perfect for someone who needed to stay off the radar. The owner, herself a domestic violence survivor, understood the need for privacy and flexible arrangements. Tommy started attending the shelter's partnership school, a small private institution experienced in working with children from difficult backgrounds. His teacher, Ms. Chun, had a special way with traumatized kids, helping them feel safe while gently encouraging their academic growth. For the first time, Tommy began talking about the future, what he wanted to be when he grew up, places he wanted to visit, things he wanted to learn. 3 months into their new life, Sarah received news that sent her world spinning again. Michael had been arrested, not for anything related to her, but for assault at a bar. His drinking had escalated, and this time his victim was a stranger who pressed charges. The arrest violated his probation from a previous DUI, meaning he faced significant jail time. The news brought complicated emotions. Relief warred with lingering fear, anger with a surprising touch of sadness for the man she'd once loved. In group therapy, Sarah worked through these feelings, learning that it was okay to mourn the death of her dreams while celebrating her liberation from the nightmare they'd become. As winter settled over the Victoria and house, Sarah and Tommy began preparing for their next step. Second Chances had a transitional housing program, apartments in secure buildings scattered throughout the city, where families could establish independence while maintaining connection to the shelter's support services. Their name came up for a small 2-bedroom unit in a quiet neighborhood across town. The day they moved into their new apartment, Sarah found a care package waiting. Basics like toilet paper and cleaning supplies, but also touches that spoke of understanding. A new stuffed elephant for Tommy that matched his old one. A set of wind chimes like those that had hung at Second Chances. A journal with an inscription from Margaret. "Your story isn't over, it's just beginning." Tommy's room in the new apartment had a window seat overlooking a small park. He spent hours there, reading books from the shelter's library or drawing pictures of their new life. Sometimes Sarah would find him just watching the people below, no longer scanning for danger, but simply observing with a child's restored curiosity. Sarah's remote work with the publishing house steadily increased, her attention to detail and reliability earning her additional projects. She took online courses in digital marketing, building skills that could ensure their future security. The shelter's financial literacy program helped her manage their resources, building a safety net one careful decision at a time. Their new neighborhood offered anonymous safety in its ordinary routines. Tommy joined a local soccer team, making friends with kids who knew nothing of his past. Sarah found herself chatting with other parents at practices, gradually learning to trust in casual conversations again. They became regular visitors to the library 2 blocks away, where Tommy discovered a passion for science books and Sarah rediscovered her love of poetry. 1 year after their escape, Sarah stood in their small kitchen, watching Tommy do homework at the counter. The afternoon sun painted patterns on the walls through the wind chimes, their gentle music a reminder of how far they'd come. Her phone buzzed. a text from Gloria, who had become a steady presence in their lives, checking in regularly and visiting when she could. The message was simple. Michael's sentencing was today. 5 years minimum. You're free. Sarah let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. The words blurred as tears filled her eyes, not of fear or sadness, but of pure relief. Tommy looked up from his homework, concern crossing his face until she smiled at him. "How about we get ice cream?" she suggested, her voice steady with newfound strength. Tommy's face lit up, and as they walked to the ice cream shop around the corner, Sarah marveled at how ordinary moments had become extraordinary gifts. Each step on the sidewalk was a step further into their future. Each smile exchanged with neighbors a brick in the foundation of their new life. That evening, as Tommy slept peacefully in his room, Sarah sat by his window seat, watching the stars emerge. She thought about all the women still trapped in situations like she had been, and made a decision. Tomorrow, she would talk to Margaret about volunteer opportunities at Second Chances. It was time to help others find their way to freedom, just as she had been helped. The wind chimes sang softly in the night breeze, their melody a reminder that sometimes the end of one story is just the beginning of another. Sarah and Tommy had not just survived, they had found their way to a new life, one built on hope, strength, and the kindness of others. Their future stretched before them, not as a shadow to fear, but as a path to explore, together and free at last.